sure we see behind me and all around us our Canvas page. I'll go ahead and make it in the student view. What I want to do is start off with is talk about some of the next assignments. So if you go into modules, keep in mind the next batch of material is called Section 2. And Section 2 includes chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. And one thing to note is I'm still working on actual chapter 6. So chapter 6 is not yet available to you. And so for that reason, online quiz 2 isn't available to you. So as soon as I finish chapter 6, which is Central Asia, which hopefully life will settle down and I can do that, then I will make online quiz 2 available to you. But you still will have at least 12 days to do it. So it's not like it's going to be a deal where I'll make it available February 27th when it's due February 28th. You'll have plenty of time, and you'll have another Thursday meeting in between then when I'll probably give you an update regarding that. All right, next up, I want to talk about online discussion 2. So online discussion 2, you'll see that there's 5 different options. And going forward, I don't know if you noticed, the first one was pretty straightforward. Most of you are probably talking about yourself or analyzing those photographs from discussion 1, if you recall. Very simple assignment. Well, that's kind of what I'm hoping with these as well. So the goal with the online discussions is, to help your grade out. Maybe, your quiz wasn't that, or your exam wasn't as good as you thought. Well, getting a 5 out of 5, just essentially doing the tasks. This is not like stuff in which you're asked to think too deeply. And so I gave you several different options to suit your particular tastes. So maybe too many options. I don't know. Some of us don't like options. And so I guess I'll go through each one of these quite quickly and just narrate them somewhat. All right. So first off, discussion 2, option 1. It just essentially asks you to think about your career. And since most of you will be probably living in Northern America, and think about your particular industry. What are you interested in? So maybe computer science. Well, then maybe you're going to be interested in Austin, Texas, or whatever might be the cool place for computer science grads. If you're into environmental science, maybe going out west somewhere, maybe going out to areas in different states where they have more environmental jobs, whether it be just more available because there's a bigger environment, because there's nature and parks and all those kind of things, but also maybe there's state policies that might be more environmentally friendly that might attract you. So think about those kind of things. All I'm doing is getting you to think about yourself and apply it to this particular course. Not trying to get you, you don't need to do, if you're Googling stuff, that's cool. But I really don't want to know in New York City, the average income is this for finance people. Just be casual. This is not something in which you need to, find the answers from the internet. All right, option 2. So option 2, if you scroll down to the bottom, each of you have been given a North American and a Sub-Saharan African city. And so all I want you to do is just do a little bit of research. This is, once again, this is not required. This is just one option of 5 for you to choose from. And so here, just kind of applying the concepts we've talked about in chapter 2, the cultural markers, and just kind of think, okay, look at some images, share those images. Obviously you've never, probably haven't been to these places. So unless you have, if you've been to this particular city and you've got photos, great. But most of you haven't. So just steal some pictures from the internet and just add them. And so what I want you then to do is to analyze the photographs. Tell me what you see. Tell me examples on those particular images of the places that shows the culture. Maybe it's a particular religious building that is representative of culture. Maybe there's a sign in a particular language that shows cultural markers. And so this is just, once again, applying concepts to random things, hoping that, we also get 5 points or 10, whatever it is. Next up is for those of you who maybe like to cook. This is the World Geography Kitchen. And so I kind of want to make sure we get a little bit of all the regions. I don't want to overdose on Sub-Saharan Africa. And so here, let's go ahead and let's look at, in this case, Northern Africa, and Southwest Asia. So what this is, if you're interested, if you like making food, if you like cooking food, what if you maybe you already know a food type in this particular area, maybe you already make it, then you're good to go. Essentially, just make it, assemble, and just tell me a little bit about it. So tell me a little bit about the dish, what kind of ingredients you used, and maybe we'll share that with everybody else, and maybe we can learn from that particular dish and how it maybe applies to the environment there, the culture there, whatever it might be. And just to make sure, we're just not, taking pictures of like Julia Child or some cook cooking. I need to see like something that shows me evidence that it's you. So if it's just a sign that says devour geography, or maybe your picture, that's good to go as far as kind of evidence. Okay, this is proof that this food that's in this photograph is actual your food. All right, keep on keeping on. Sub-Saharan Africa film room. So this is pretty straightforward. Just essentially, if you're interested into movies, I'm not. So go for it if you are. And so essentially watch one of these movies, and what I like to do is just once again that word apply the concepts to stuff that's discussed somewhere in the chapters. So if you do choose this option, make sure you're applying something to something that's said. I don't want just a critique. I don't want just a review. I want connections to stuff said in somewhere in the modules, somewhere in the course, the Canvas course here. Finally, the last option, once again, only choose one, is the Central Asian Film Room. Come on. Where are we at? Is it a dead link? There we go. All right. And so I don't know if you know this guy named Borat. He was from this country called Kazakhstan, or is from a country called Kazakhstan, which is in Central Asia. And so what I want you to do is kind of think about this movie and how it might portray life in Central Asia. Maybe how does it portray life in Kazakhstan? Is it true? Is it negative stereotypes that kind of is perpetuating things that aren't true, and it's kind of like, is it misleading? And that's up to you. So just do a little bit of research. Maybe you already know. I have never seen the whole movie, I don't think. I've just maybe seen scenes, maybe on the YouTubes. So for this one, tell me a little bit about the movie, but more what I'm interested in is these questions here, kind of cultural and sensitivity things. All right, now I'm going to open up any questions, comments, concerns about these. All right. Like I said, going back to our assignments, upcoming assignments, this is great. I'm glad it's in this order. So online quiz 2, once again, that will be available as soon as I finish the Central Asia chapter. It'll be no later than February 6th. And then exam 2, of course, is March 2nd at 9 a.m. Probably going to be the same format. In fact, I don't see it changing. We'll talk more when I hand back the exams as far as advice and all of that. Online discussion 2 will be due on Thursday, that Thursday evening, just like how it was for the last one. And what I'm going to do is activity 2. What I've decided to do is, instead of having activity 1 do the same before the exam, do that Tuesday before, I kind of thought, well, maybe let's give you guys a little bit more of a break and give you a little bit more time to do activity 2. And so that's actually going to be pushed back and due this Sunday after exam 2. So I just want to go ahead and introduce that. If you're a hardcore syllabus follower and you're kind of, thinking, wait a minute, I thought the activities are always due the Tuesday before an exam. Just saying, I'm trying to make things better for you guys by moving the activity 2 and giving you a few more days to complete it, so we don't have like all this stuff that's all due within 2 days. Kind of spreading it out over the course of 6 days. And that's kind of me recalibrating, because once again, the first time I've taught on campus since before the virus. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, and I don't know how anyone online can get a hold of us, I'll go ahead. Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm at fault.
I haven't been able to open like the link on our, and I don't know if that got fixed or not, but I haven't found anybody else.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't even know.
Yeah. I saw that right just now when I was prepping. I'll fix that right now. So everyone's looking live at how Canvas operates here. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. There we go. Let's see. Perfect. Well, that's great because we can talk about it now. All right. So, okay, we're now live. Thank you for mentioning that because now I can talk about it. I wanted to fix that, but I just never got around to it. All right. So now what I want to do is I'm not going to actually go through all the map locations. I will do that in a future Thursday meeting. So just like I did last time, I think that was helpful for those that actually viewed it because I mean there were some just maps that were just perfect, and I think you just obviously you knew which parts of like Northern America, which parts of South Asia, knowing Southeast Asia has that one island split in half. All those things that I demonstrated beforehand. I'll do the same thing for these. And so let's go through them. So the first part is we're going. In this case, I had the maps were already there, so I've added the maps. Once again, this link just went live. So here are the blank maps. So this is the blank map of Africa, which includes, of course, Sub-Saharan Africa and Northern Africa. Then here is Southwest Asia. And so Southwest Asia, as I'll talk about when I explain this particular map, includes, in this case, Egypt, which is kind of Southwest Asia, and also Afghanistan, which is kind of Southwest Asia. So once again, these borders and these regions aren't perfect. There is some kind of in between. But if we go ahead and scroll down, you'll see that Afghanistan is also considered Central Asian. That's what it really is. I think in this course, we're going to think of it as being a Central Asian country. We're going to lump it in with them. So those are the blank maps. So on those blank maps, so same idea. Those three maps will be included on whatever Thursday, March 2nd, I believe, whatever that date is, with the exam. And I go back to the map, and here are the places or the countries and whatnot. So there are, I don't know, I'm a horrible professional geographer. I don't know this, but I'm guessing 60 countries in Africa? I don't know, maybe more, maybe less. But I've only kind of selected just a few. Now, those few that I selected for a reason because they're ones that somewhere in the course I talk about specifically. So once again, I'm not just doing these just to quiz you, so I can get that evil red pen out and go to work. No, I'm doing these just because we're going to be talking about these places in the chapter. So I want you to go ahead and learn and identify and know where they are. It'll definitely help you in possible quizzes and maybe even the exam. So map 1, there's these particular countries. And so all I ask is just, identify this particular country on the Africa map. And you, for example, Morocco, I say label Morocco with an M. And so wherever I see an M, and so that's Morocco. And so once again, these are just a select few, and it's going to require practice. I tell you, many of these countries, I have to kind of remind myself, which one is that? Okay, where? And so I'm telling you, it's going to take memorization and practice looking at these particular countries because, of course, we can't look at any maps, any cell phones, or anything like that during the exam. Continue on. There's these particular physical features. And so on probably next Thursday, I'll go through this. I'll go through and I'll actually label all of these on that blank map. And so you'll see them and you'll notice that a lot of them separate countries. So they're kind of drawn for you already on the map. You just got to trace them. And so, like I said, that will all be described later. Next up is Southwest Asia. So those are the countries of Southwest Asia and physical regions. And finally, Central Asia will just identify the locations of the stands, all those countries. A lot of stuff, but hey, I'll be honest, this is the same stuff they're teaching at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, same exact stuff. So, I don't think we're any different than they are. Cool. And as always, ask for help. If you need, if you want, I'm here to help. That's what I'm here to do. I am a helper. Riggedy, right on. We good? Cruz? All right. So let's go to exam 2 information, back to it. And here are the questions that I'll be going over today and into the next few Thursdays. So I'll go ahead and I'll start from the top. And so one of the things is you'll see we'll go from Northern America to Sub-Saharan Africa to Northwest Africa, to Northern Africa and Southwest Asia. And then at the bottom, I don't know if I'm going to add a question here or not. I don't know if we're going to talk about Russia or not. I don't know. So let's go ahead and push it on. So the first one, identify several key characteristics of the 2 historical waves of international immigration to the United States, and pretty much the same pattern relates to Canada as well. It's for the most part the same stuff, but for this question, it's just specific to the United States. And so first off, we have the 2 big waves. And so that's what we have to kind of identify as the first wave and distinguish it. What makes it different than the second wave? Now, the first wave, we have to think about, well, what's going on? The first wave is, let's say, from 1850 till the Great Depression. So what's happening in that time in the world? Once again, going back to stuff we talked about beforehand in this course, the second agricultural revolution. And so the second agricultural revolution, some outcomes of that. Reason why I talked about it, because those outcomes continue to come back time and time again. And so those outcomes were, first off, a huge increase in agricultural output. We are producing a lot more food, and so population boom. Second off, we had not only population booming, we had urbanization, people going to cities. Why were they going to cities? Because there were industries in those cities. And so the Industrial Revolution essentially drove a lot of this. Industrial Revolution attracted people from rural areas to urban areas. And so once again, we're going to see this theme time and time again throughout this particular question is people overwhelmingly since 1850 across the world or in the United States, when they migrate, not always, but for the most part, it's for an economic reason. It's for a better job. It's for a chance to earn more money. It's a chance to change a family. And so overwhelmingly, people migrate. That migration could be domestic or it could be international, but it still holds true today. Now, I know there's exceptions. There's people that are forced to migrate. There's enslavement. There's refugees. Those are no doubt part of the migration. But when we think about these 2 big waves, overwhelmingly, they were 2 big waves after, of course, the African slave trade and after the British. And so I'm focusing once again 1850 and thereafter. So from the second agricultural revolution till today. So the first wave, overwhelmingly Europeans. And so there's push and pull factors. And so throughout this, we're going to hear the term push and pull factors. And the push factors are things that force you out. And so in Europe, there's during this time period, there were booming jobs and there were industries, but there was a lot of segregation. There's a lot of persecution based on your religion. Maybe, a lot of people are gobbling up and calling areas their own. And if that's not your, if there are people who govern you who have a different culture who you don't like, all of a sudden you're going to be like, we got to go somewhere else. And so this first group was overwhelmingly Europeans, and a lot of them were being pushed out. And once again, they're seeking economic opportunity in the United States and Northern America as it started to industrialize. keep in mind, Northern America, one key difference between Northern America at the time in the 1850s was, other than the Native Americans or the indigenous population, very lightly populated. And so essentially, not only were there booming industries, wasn't a lot of competition for workers. And so it was even more likelihood that you would migrate and get to Northern America and eventually find a job and change the economics of your particular family. And so that initial wave was European. It started off what was referred to as kind of Western and Northern European. And so that's going to be the Germans, more Brits. I mean, Brits are kind of before this wave. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the history of the United States, but the Irish. Have you heard of something called the Irish potato famine? The Irish potato famine was this a famine, a devastating thing for the island, and so a lot of people died. A lot of people said, well, we're getting the hell out of here. So that was a major push factor. So the Irish would be a part of this initial group. Over time, it became more Southern and Eastern Europeans. And those would be Italians, Polish, Russian. And so the same idea applied there was in those particular countries, there's push factors. Maybe lack of jobs, overpopulation. And so those push factors said, okay, we can go somewhere else. And where was that somewhere else? During this initial wave, overwhelmingly in the northeastern part of the United States. If we really want to get technical, something I'll talk about in a few, what is today known as the Rust Belt. So Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana in 1900, I don't know if it probably had a few thousand people. But all of a sudden, Gary, Indiana had something change. All of a sudden, they became a big steel location. The steel industry was just huge there, and it just came out of nowhere. And so all of a sudden, you had this steel industry that was taking advantage of the fact that it's right there on Lake Michigan. You got Chicago and all those steel buildings in Chicago. You had all this access to the raw materials in Minnesota, also over there in Appalachia. So you get access to all the stuff. And so essentially, Gary became huge for industry. Well, a lot of the people who then migrated to Gary were individuals, especially international, who came from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they came during that time period, in the early 1900s. So from like the 1900s till the Depression. So we kind of summarize this first wave, overwhelmingly European, driven largely by economics, mostly due to the Industrial Revolution. There are those various push and pull factors. You could mention a push and pull factor. There was problems in a particular country that were in the European countries that are causing people to move. Could be religious strife. Like I said, mostly it's for economic reasons. And then that later that started off Western and Northern Europeans, like Germans and Irish. And over time became Southern and Eastern Europeans like Italians, Polish, and Russians. And there's more in there as well. Maybe your own ancestry you can trace back. And they were migrating to the northeastern part of the United States or the eastern part of Canada, what we today known as the Rust Belt. Then came the Great Depression. And so as the name implies, depression, in this case, it corresponds to an economic term of the Great Depression. And so when there's a Great Depression, when there's no jobs, all of a sudden everything goes away. Businesses close, No more industries, they go under. What happens to people migrating? Immigration, no. And so during the Great Depression, we had a stop in the immigration. Now, there might have been a few here and there, but overwhelmingly, the immigration changed, this wave. And so then we get to the second wave. And so the second wave really is continuing to this day. Depression to today. So the key characteristic of this wave of migrants to North America since the Great Depression is an increase of Asian and increasing of what we'll call Middle America. So Asian and Middle America. Now Asian, for the most part, Korea, Vietnam, Philippines. Anybody know what those have in common at all? Korea, Vietnam, Philippines. They're East and Southeast Asia. Any idea? Yeah. All places in which there is conflict. So the Philippines, kind of the idea there is the Spanish-American War. An outcome of that is we got the Philippines. That was like in the 1890s, early 1900s. Of course, the Vietnam War. And so when we have a kind of a conflict, we participate, we're going to be sympathetic. And so what a lot of these early migrants from Asia were what we see as refugees. And so this would be maybe a little bit less of, once again, that economic incentive. But of course, there is also a little bit of economic incentive to it as well. Now, that was initially. Today, it's pretty much all of Asia. So it's Southwest Asia, it's Southeast Asia, it's Central Asia, it's all over. But initially, it was just a few countries there in East Asia and Southeast Asia, and overwhelmingly, now it's all across Asia. You can look at our campus. It's full of students from all parts of Asia, which obviously is a big continent and it has a lot of diversity. Where? In the case of this particular group, in case of Asian migration to the United States, overwhelmingly urban areas. So urban areas, particularly there on the West Coast. Now that makes a bit of sense because Asia, if you look at a map, Asia and the Pacific, right across the Pacific is the western part of the United States. As far as the Middle American countries, overwhelmingly Mexico. And that's historically and today. But over time, it's been other Central American and Caribbean countries. So more recently, it started initially Mexico, and then over time, more Central American. So the rest of Middle America. Now, where in this particular group, their particular migration, kind of similar to the Asian migration. It's a distance decay. And so across from Asia, the nearest part to Northern America is the western coast. Similarly, whereas the migration taken place in Northern America of Middle Americans, it's been overwhelmingly the southern part of the country. So it's been like Texas, Arizona, California. Now, of course, more and more, it's becoming more of a dispersed pattern. But initially, and you still see the cultural core of the Latin American area still is very much there in Texas, Arizona, parts of Florida, and so on. But like I said, pretty much everywhere you'll find individuals from Middle America. So that's distinguished from the Asians. Asians are more likely to be found in urban areas. Middle America, urban, suburban, rural, wherever. But there's definitely more of a core there along the southern border with Mexico, and that makes sense. That's obviously closer to their origin. So people typically like moving. They don't like going all super far distances. They typically like going just as far, just far enough. Finally, the last thing I want to say is there's a term called chain migration. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's unfortunate because it's kind of been used in politics. But we've been always using the term. But since the Great Depression, the migration to Northern America of Asians and Middle Americans has utilized the idea of chain migration. And so what happens is a family member or a friend might move or migrate to a particular area. So for example, I might be Vietnamese and I might move to an area of Seattle. Why would I move there? Because there's other Vietnamese there. And so the idea is you're moving where you already have people who are from your particular area, people who already know your particular culture. And so when we think about chain migration, it's kind of the idea that chain is your family chain or your social network chain. So you're not just kind of picking up and just saying, all right, well, we're just going to Nebraska to find a job. You're doing it based off of somebody or there's a connection there already. And we see that here in Indianapolis. So once again, how I've talked about how Asians migration to the United States is quite varied. In Indianapolis, we have on the south side a large population from Burma or from Myanmar. And so they live in the town of Southport and in Greenwood. Maybe you're familiar with that area of town and you know that. So they have a utilized chain migration. And so there's a reason why they decided to all cluster in a particular area of town. There's the church that they share together. There's the restaurants, the groceries, all of the various connections that make them feel more comfortable, even though they're on the opposite side of the world. And so chain migration, whether it be Middle American or Asian, is utilized overwhelmingly. All right. Well, I don't know. Maybe I hit that out of the park. Maybe I didn't, but I talked about a lot more than I thought I would. So that probably will be on the exam. That one's probably on there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When we're talking about like the increase in the Middle America population, and they're like along the southern border, can we say Sun Belt?
Yes. Perfect. Yes, that's actually the term I wanted to use, Sun Belt. And so this is going to be a term you're going to hear on the next response, the next question. But if you want to say in terms of that term I mentioned, as I was trying to essentially say it, I was describing it, but essentially that area there from Texas, California, all the way to Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, that's overwhelmingly what we call the Sun Belt, but overwhelmingly where we see the Middle American populations today, particularly Central American. Thank you. Awesome. Even if it's 4 people, I just love doing this. Even if I'm putting everyone to sleep, I don't care. I'm having fun. All right. Next up, describe several key shifts in the economic geography of Northern America since the 1980s. So the shifts. So the key shifts, there's been 3 of them. There's been 3 key shifts. So let's kind of go through each of these. Hopefully I give myself enough room. So we're going to think of the shifts in terms of, I'll just go ahead and put them in. Where? A cool color. what, and how. I'll probably have to erase to make room for the how. So for this question, if this one is asked like the other one, they're both asked, then there's going to be a little bit of redundancy. And so as far as here, as far as the shift since the 1980s, as far as there's been a shift in terms of where industry occurs. What's the question here? Okay, cool. All right. And so the economic geography, we're going to focus in on the term called deindustrialization. So in your response, I need to see the word deindustrialization. And that's just kind of the story. I can quickly tell as far as the Industrial Revolution happened in Western Europe, it happened in Northern America. We're cranking out all these industries. Well, guess what's else happening across other parts of the world? In East Asia, Latin America. Well, guess what? They're industrializing. And so what ended up happening was as industry started to close or became not as competitive to stay here in Northern America, they've moved elsewhere. So that's the international story we've seen. But the same thing has happened domestically. And so once again, that term, Rust Belt. Now the Rust Belt, I don't know, some people say it's a bad term. I don't know, it's what it's known. I'm not kind of trying to choose sides. It's what it's known as. Maybe you could say like the decaying American industrial heartland if you so choose, but we've always called it the Rust Belt. And so that's where jobs were, and they've moved to the Sun Belt. Now in the readings, I have a kind of a picture that shows the Rust Belt, and I have pictures that show the Sun Belt. But if we just essentially describe the Rust Belt, it's the northeast part of the United States, along with the kind of the Great Lakes of Canada. So all that's here, kind of in northern and the eastern part of those two countries. Sorry, the eastern part of Canada and the northern and eastern part of the United States. So that's the Rust Belt, and that would even include here. I mean, Gary. We think about the Rust Belt. It probably stretches from, let's say, Chicago, Indy, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, all the way up to New York and all of that area. So it's Detroit, Chicago. The Rust Belt is, it includes definitely us. We're definitely a part of the Rust Belt, especially northern Indiana. Now, where have jobs gone? Like I said, many have gone international, but many also went to the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt I just described in the previous question, but the Sun Belt is essentially the more southern latitudes of the United States. And so you could say the southern part of Northern America. So what's happening here is two main things, other than the weather's good. The weather's not as good there in the Rust Belt. Other than that is a booming population. So you had a lot of available workers, but also more affordable workers who didn't demand as high of a wage. And so it made sense for a lot of industries to move and relocate to the Sun Belt because you had a lot of available workers. You had maybe new fresh facilities, new land, obviously warmer climate, maybe more, obviously better than the harsh winters in the Northeast. But you also had, people who didn't demand as high of a wage as people in New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island. So that's the where. From the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt, make sure you kind of explain a little bit as far as where those are located. Next up is the what. And so kind of would say simple things like textiles, basic electronics, simple things, no more. So as far as a shift, no longer was there industries making, I know there's the My Pillow guy who's USA, but most textiles, most clothing companies, if you look, this is why we do activity 1. If you looked at where your textiles were from, where your stuff was from, probably not a lot of textiles were United States. If they are, they're probably really, really nice. Your basic electronics, like the simple things, like I don't know if you did your mouse, Oh, juice. Keyboards, things that are relatively simple today. No longer, those aren't made here. Those are probably made in China, maybe Mexico, but probably made in China. So essentially, those are no longer done here. They used to be, but no longer. In fact, I have like an old video game thing. It's like, and it says made in Taiwan. Like nothing's made in Taiwan anymore. So pretty much everything is been shifted in terms of these simple things. They've been moved somewhere else offshore. What have we done? More sophisticated stuff. I guess that's my word. Higher tech. Maybe I don't look like it, but I got heart disease and it's pretty bad. Who would have thought the guy looks like me? But eventually, probably pretty soon, they're going to have to put a stent into my heart. And so that's going to open up the artery. That stent is manufactured here in Indiana, here in the United States. Now, something that's going to be, put into my heart, put into an artery, make it expand to remove a blockage. Well, that's pretty high tech. That's pretty sophisticated. So that's something that's manufactured here. Those are the kind of things we're doing here. CAT scan machines. Those big, huge machines that they stick you through, to find out whether or not you have a condition. X-ray machines, although those have become now so simple, I guess those are being manufactured, but the most sophisticated ones are being manufactured here. So you think about, a lot of industry, like Silicon Valley is like an industrial area. What were they making? Well, they're making like software. They're making, computer products. So sophisticated, high-tech stuff. I mean, even stuff that isn't so much tangible stuff you can touch, like clothing and textiles and electronics, like watches. Hell, I don't know where are our phones made. Anybody? Where's your phone made? Did you do that in your? Where are these things? I don't even know where they're made. Say, China. Yeah. So I mean that's probably too simple. Although there is a lot of stuff in there that. We won't get. Maybe I don't know if I talked about the resources in Africa that they're all fighting over because it's in all the cell phones. It's called coltan. I don't know. Maybe I talked about it. Maybe I don't. I can't remember. All right. Enough of that. And so the what has changed from the simple stuff to more sophisticated stuff. So there's a reason why there's certain stuff, as I explained in my feedback, that are made in the United States, like stuff that you put on your body, lotions, because that's got to go through the FDA approval. But other than those things, we don't see much made in the United States that's in terms of electronics, other than stuff that's super sophisticated. All right. Next up is the how. And so we switched from mass production to flexible. So mass to flexible. I'm just going to briefly kind of explain mass and flexible. Maybe not go too much into describing it like I would in the text or like I would maybe in a different course, an economic geography course. I would go really hardcore into it. But the idea with mass production is you have a big, huge facility. And you have the old assembly line. Maybe you've heard about the assembly line, Ford and all of that. And so essentially what happens is everything happens in one big facility. And so as, let's say, a car goes through the particular line, they add more components, and then it rolls out as a finished product. It rolls out as a finished vehicle. Now, in mass production, the idea is, okay, we're going to produce a lot of them. And so that was great when nobody had cars and you wanted to get a ton of cars to market. That made a lot of sense. And this is, akin to every industry. You can think about other industries that are like that as well. I'm just using the car industry in this case as an example of switching from mass to flexible production. Everything, artificial limbs also went from mass production to flexible production as well. So this is across industries, but I'm just focusing on cars. All right, so the idea here is then we have this assembly line. It's great. It's going to crank out all these cars. And all these cars, there's not going to be much variation in them because you're just all the same. They're all being made on the same lines. So you're going to get this pretty much in this case. The old adage was all the Model Ts, you had your choice of black or black. So you pretty much was the standard color. So essentially you have this big warehouse now that you have to store all these cars. Now, what if all of a sudden people don't want to drive cars anymore? What if all of a sudden gas prices go up and people say, I don't know if I want to buy a car because I can't afford to get around in it. What if all of a sudden there's a global depression? So all of those various things leave it very vulnerable when you have all of your eggs essentially in this one basket in which you're just hoping that people will buy a particular product in which you've already made a ton of them. And so this isn't efficient. This isn't essentially the whole idea of getting a custom item or getting just the right amount of a product on the market and not overproducing. Because all that, if all of a sudden nobody wants your vehicles, look at all that lost profit in which you have to figure out what to do with it. And so the idea of the flexible production, it's kind of based on the idea it's the right time, the right amount at the right place. And so instead of having all the production done in one facility, what they do is instead they have an assembly facility, but the production is done in other facilities. And so instead of that car going through the line, going, essentially what happens is a customer says, you know what, I want a particular vehicle. Or a series of customers, maybe dealers wants a particular vehicle. Well, essentially they tell the company and then they tell their producers then to make that particular product. It's much more efficient. So it's essentially customized to the consumer. So there's no waste. There's no, huge amounts of inventory in which they're just hoping people buy. It's essentially knowing that you have X number of consumers, and so you're going to make X number of vehicles. And so what this does is this completely changes the economic geography when we see places like, for example, in Columbus, there's a Toyota, in Greensburg has Honda, just south of Lafayette they have Subaru, just north of Evansville they have Toyota. So essentially what those companies have done is they've said, okay, we're going to locate our assembly facilities in Indiana, and then we're going to rely on Indiana producers to provide us with tires, radios, the wheels, the various electronics. And so essentially we can see this today when we have these assembly plants scattered across the state. What that also means is there's other production facilities that are scattered nearby that help to serve that assembly plant. So this is, once again, cars is the example I'm using here. If you know of an industry, then go for it. Use that as well in your particular example. So the 3 shifts, just real quick, 3 shifts. First off, the where, Rust Belt to Sun Belt. The what, simple electronics, textiles to more sophisticated electronics, sophisticated products. And then a shift in how from mass to flexible. Being able to explain those briefly. Go for it.
Are there regions or countries that still do mass production?
Yeah, China, overwhelmingly China. And so there's a, maybe we'll take a look at it later, but there's a video, and it's fascinating, in which the opening scene is they go through the one facility where pretty much 90% of the world's irons are made. Irons, like the hand irons. So it might be GE, it might be RCA, whatever product it might be. All of them are made in one facility. Further, there's another example, an article called Sock City is next to Sweater City. So a majority of the world's, or not world, but the majority of the socks that are produced in one particular town. So essentially all the mass production is done in one particular area. So there's no doubt there's examples of particularly of those simple things, mass production, and that makes sense. I mean, T-shirts, clothing items. I mean, that are being shipped all throughout the world. we're going to make a ton of them. Cool. Right on, right on. All right. Next up, how climate varies within sub-Saharan Africa. Now we're moving on to sub-Saharan Africa, scooting across the Atlantic here. So we're going to start with the physical geography, and it's kind of a fascinating region of the world. There's really there's no other region like it in terms of its climate. And the first key point, I don't know how much I emphasize this in the readings and the videos, but climate, you really can't see temperature. And yeah, you can see precipitation in the form of rain. How do you see climate? You see climate in the vegetation found on the land. So you can see climate, invisible things, temperature, for the most part, precipitation, yeah, it's clear. You can see it in the vegetation of the land. So in Africa, you're going to find a particular pattern in which things are mirrored. What I mean by mirrored is they're symmetrical. So through the middle, you have a particular characteristic, and then on both sides of that, it's similar. So I'll go ahead and I'll flesh that out now. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of imagine we got a line right through the middle of sub-Saharan Africa. And that also happens to correspond with our good friend, the equator. So we have the equator going right through the middle of sub-Saharan Africa. So once again, in this particular course, the reason why I talk about the climate regions, I talk about because we talk about time and time again, and we use our certain terms. We use the terms A, B, C, D, and E. So those are specific terms that we use, and so if on an exam you didn't put those, big point deduction. And so we use the terms A, B, C, D, and E. So in sub-Saharan Africa, along the equator, you have an A climate. In A climate, we associate with hot temperatures, but also high precipitation. Now, on both sides of the equator, it's mirrored. So above the A climate area, we have an area that's a B climate. In B climates, we associate those with dry areas, areas that lack precipitation. So like I said, it's mirrored on both sides, so I'm going to go ahead and draw the B down here. That's why I say by mirrored. You have A, B, on both sides. In B, we associate with arid or dry or deserts. And then in the southern part of sub-Saharan Africa, we've got just a little bit of sea, just a little bit of sea. And that's there in South Africa, just a little bit. So, as far as how climate varies in sub-Saharan Africa, well, first off, it's mirrored, and it's comprised of mostly A and B climates, a little bit of C, no Ds and no Es. Maybe minor exceptions, but I'm not going to go there as far as, mountaintops and those kind of things. We don't need to go there. Those are few and far between in the case of Africa. So for these top ones, for so not what I mean by that. What I mean by the top ones, not including that C climates. For these A and B climates, think about the A climate. It's pretty much always hot, and it's pretty much always rainy. So you have obviously there a tropical rainforest, green and lush. And so once again, you see climate in terms of the vegetation, and so it's dense forest. And so for a forest to be dense, to have all that vegetation, it requires a ton of sun and a ton of rain. And they find that there along the equator. So in terms of seasonality, along the equator, along that part of Africa, not much at all. However, when we get to the B climate of Africa, That's where things change. So here, the seasonality, not like our seasonality, where we have winter, spring, summer, and fall, and changes in temperature. There, the seasonality is wet and dry. And that's the same on both sides. Seasonality, in which the seasons are the wet season and the dry season. Of course, down here in the southern part of Africa, South Africa, a sea climate, I mean, one of the key characteristics of a sea climate is seasonality. What I mean by that is winter, spring, summer, fall, changing of the seasons, enough of a cooling of the temperature to have changes, where the other ones are more precipitation based. That's all I'm going to go with that one. I could probably go a whole lot more into that one, but I think that I want to hit the key points there. I'll let you decide. One more or call it quits? We got 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we can. Do it? One more? Right on. All right. All right, one more. Explain how human impact on the environment. Explain human impact on the environment in sub-Saharan Africa by focusing on deforestation and desertification. So, questions in which there's like two things. That's pretty much, a dead giveaway. Just go ahead and do 1, 2, and make sure to fully explain the one, and then fully explain the second. So the first would be desertification, and the second one would be deforestation. Now, I would like to remind you that whole IPAT formula. And so remember, I equals P times A times T. In the case of sub-Saharan Africa, the biggest challenge in terms of environmental challenge is a very large population in which, as I show in the human geography part of sub-Saharan Africa, it's still one of the fastest growing regions of the world. And it'll be that way for a few more decades. So this is where you're going to see the world's largest cities in about 20, 30 years. Population-wise, they're going to be in sub-Saharan Africa. This is where you're going to see, the top 50 cities in the world in terms of largest cities, a lot more African, and it's because of the booming population there that's still booming as death rates remain low, but birth rates are starting to finally come down lower and lower and lower. You still have very high fertility rates there. And so the challenge is a very large population, and a population that's growing on a continent, in a region that lacks or does not have much arable land. Now, arable, what does that mean? Farmable land. Now, it's a big continent. If you look at Africa, it's one of the top, it's huge continent. But there's not a lot of places there for agriculture. And so that's a challenge when you have, once again, a very large population that's only growing more and more over time. And so that then puts pressure on the land. And so there's two particular areas, or should I say two particular regions, desert areas, but also the rainforest areas that are being impacted from this pressure of population growth. So let's start off with desertification. Simple term, desertification is just essentially the expansion of deserts over time. So desertification doesn't mean the removal of deserts, it actually means the expansion of deserts. And so what happens is, in particular areas of sub-Saharan Africa, one that you must mention is the area called the Sahel. Now the Sahel is I believe on the map, information part. If we have the Sahara Desert here, and once again, sub-Saharan Africa is kind of shaped something like that. So the Sahel is in the northern part, and so what we have is the Sahara Desert, kind of up against some grasslands. And so over time, with population pressures, individuals and groups are converting the grassland into farmland. But unfortunately, over time, that farmland can't sustain agriculture, and so the land becomes almost useless. Essentially, it's depleted of its nutrients. It's not suitable for agriculture. And so thus, one problem is the deserts are expanding from the conversion of these grasslands to agriculture that can't be sustained. And so what happens? You go through, essentially you deplete a plot of land from its nutrients, you go and move on to the next one. And so you can understand how this puts pressure on the environment. So in particular, the Sahel, the southern part of the Sahara Desert, it's expanding. It's moving, encroaching to the south. This is also happening in the southern part of sub-Saharan Africa, there where the Kalahari Desert is as well. So you're seeing the same idea apply there as well. So if you're familiar more with the Kalahari, go ahead and use that as an example to support your understanding of desertification. Once again, the big challenge here with desertification and deforestation is increasing population is putting pressure to convert land to arable land, which the environmental impact is, we got environmental change, and that's desertification. And so the soil, it's fragile, lacks nutrients, and so once essentially it's used, it's rendered useless, and so they move on somewhere else. They leave it, they abandon it, and it becomes desert over time. Another challenge is, in a lot of the Sahel and Kalahari, you have nomadic grazers. And so essentially what they have is they have cattle. They have herds of cattle. And so that's their industry, is the cattle industry. And they also happen to be there in the grasslands of the Sahel. What do cattle like to eat? Cattle like to eat grass. And so here you have an industry with, where it's essentially eating up the grassland, and once again, adding another reason why the deserts are expanding. Lastly, once again, I mentioned in this part of Africa, they have that pronounced wet season, and they have a pronounced dry season. So during that dry season, there's a problem, which if you have arable land, there's a scarcity of water. There's no water. And so what you got to do is you got to do irrigation. And so once again, we see this problem as far as you're taking water that would be going to the desert, would be going to the grasslands, would be going to that area of the Sahel, and you're diverting it and moving it to a farm field. Once again, you're messing with the natural flow, natural waterways. What that's going to do is going to dry out the area, Essentially, you're removing water from the surface, adding once again to desertification. So I just mentioned what we call anthropogenic forces, or essentially things that are humans. It could be said that desertification happens naturally, just changes in temperature and all that. Could be. I'm not going there. I'm just more strictly speaking of anthropogenic things humans do. So conversion of land to ag, cattle industry, eating up all the grass and converting that grass to desert. Irrigation, moving water from its natural flow to water a field, plot of land. All right, for the next one, deforestation. I love the wheres, so being able to explain where. And so the first one, the Sahel, when I had the Kalahari, that's cool too. In the case of the deforestation, Central Africa, of course, where we see the tropical rainforests. Going back to the previous question. Central, and let's also put Western Africa. These are terms used at the beginning of the chapter. So Western Africa includes places like Ghana, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia. I once had a guest speaker who the timber industry in Liberia is big, and he is trying to protect the timber. So he's had numerous times people have tried to kill him because he's just trying to protect the Liberian rainforest from the timber industry there. So that would be a good example of a Western African country. And so same idea applies here. Increasing population, putting increasing pressure on the land, the arable land. And so those forested areas, you're also going to see it as well. Forested areas cleared for agricultural purposes. Same idea applies for here as well, in which the role of agriculture, converting the land for agricultural purposes. When we have a booming population, of course, we have booming mouths to feed. And so there becomes pressure to produce that food supply. Thus the agriculture, the need for agricultural areas. And I'm not going to get too technical. This isn't a soils course, although I do teach a soils course. It starts March 26th if you want to join. The type of soil found in a tropical rainforest, you might think, wait a minute, tropical rainforest, I mean, it's got the most tallest trees, it's lush, it's green, it's all that. It's got probably the most nutrient-rich soil. It does, but only at the top. So it's got a certain soil characteristic that's called detritus, in which, yeah, it's good at first, but once you start kind of disturbing that top layer, it's rendered useless. So the tropical rainforest is a particular soil type, in which once you convert it to ag, similar to the desert, it's pretty much, yeah, you can get some out of it, but after a few years, you just potentially have to move on because the nutrients are all gone. So that's one thing is the ag. I'd say one. Second, still to this day, a good amount of sub-Saharan Africa gets its fuel, its energy from biomass. So biomass includes trees, vegetation, essentially used, think of it as like wood used as a fuel source or an energy source. Continuing our themes that we continue throughout the semester, what's happening right now in Africa is rapid urbanization, huge rural to urban migration. And so cities are going from little blips because of all that growth. They're getting bigger, bigger, bigger. And so over time, that's putting pressure on the surrounding tropical rainforest areas. So you have booming populations that are also urbanizing, so clustering in certain cities that are expanding outward into rainforest areas and then clearing it. And once again, this is all about removing forested areas. Finally, our fourth thing is just primary sector dominant a region. And so those are going to be raw materials, extracting resources. So if a desired mineral is underneath, let's say, a large area of rainforest, you can bet your bottom dollar that a bigger country or a bigger country with several companies are going to say, we're interested in that land. We really care about you. But really what they care about is that mineral, and so they clear forest for that mineral. Or, to use that previous example I used, his name was Silas, I wonder if he's still alive, Silas Siakor. What a memory. Where'd that come from? Silas Siakor, who lived in Liberia, and in Liberia they have a big timber industry. And so there's demand for Liberian wood. And so that's a primary sector industry, a primary sector economy, in which it's all about getting those raw materials, they clear it, and hopefully over time those forests come back, but they get cleared faster than they can be replenished. Of course, we're going to have deforestation. That's it. Cool. Thanks, guys.